I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you've finally achieved everything you've ever worked for.
Like the absolute peak.
Right, the exact peak. I mean, absolutely everything. You have total financial stability, the undisputed top of your career. You have complete physical and, emotional security.
Which is pretty rare, honestly.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
It's the dream, right? You vanquished all your rivals, your bank accounts are completely full, and you just finally have room to breathe.
Yeah.
And naturally, because you're human, you look around at all this massive success and you think, I need to build a monument.
You want to leave a mark.
Exactly. You think, I need to build something permanent to reflect how far I've come. I need a legacy.
Yeah.
So, you drop the architectural plans, you source the absolute best material.
It's really expensive stuff.
The best of the best. And then, right as you are about to break ground, you receive a message from the highest possible authority and tell you, no, you are not going to build a monument for me. I'm going to build a monument out of you.
Which is just a wild thing to hear.
It's a staggering reversal.
Yeah.
The promise that I will build a monument out of you. And that is the exact scenario, the exact conversation that kicks off one of the most pivotal moments in ancient literature.
It really is.
So today, for our deep dive, we are looking at how a single no from God to an ancient king, how it essentially rewrote the entirety of human history.
Yeah, and we're going to be pulling from a massive stack of research today on what scholars call the Davidic covenant.
Right, the Davidic covenant.
Primarily, we're looking at the texts found in 2 Samuel chapter 7 and 1 Chronicles chapter 17.
Which I know sounds like deep theology.
It does, yeah, but this is far from just some isolated historical footnote. I mean, we are looking at an absolute masterclass in ancient geopolitics.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to dive into the psychological dynamics of ancient honor and shame cultures, and there is some just brilliant literary wordplay in here, too.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how this one specific promise, a promise made to a monarch living all the way back in the 10th century BCE, how that became the theological engine driving the rest of the biblical narrative.
The whole thing runs on it.
Exactly. We want to understand how it shaped modern concepts of leadership and legacy and hope, and ultimately, why the people who wrote the New Testament believed this ancient conversation basically held the key to the entire cosmos.
Because to really grasp the trajectory of all these biblical texts, you literally have to start with the Davidic covenant.
Right.
It provides this sweeping, redemptive, historical timeline. I mean, it takes the ancient promises that were made to Abraham centuries earlier, right?
Yeah, the land, the sea.
Exactly. It funnels all of those into a single royal family, and then it shoots them forward to the ultimate claims made in the 1st century CE.
So it's the hinge.
It's the hinge. If you don't understand the mechanics of what happened in 2 Samuel 7, the rest of the narrative is just going to seem like, I don't know, a disjointed collection of ancient stories.
Just random myths. Okay, well, let's lay the groundwork. Because to understand why this specific promise was so explosive, we first have to step back into the incredibly chaotic world King David was actually living in.
Yeah, it was not a peaceful time.
Not at all. You don't just get to the comfortable monument building phase without surviving the brutal, volatile startup phase.
No, you definitely do not.
So let's talk about the 10th century BCE in the ancient Near East. What did it actually look like to be an Israelite during this specific era?
Well, it was a period of massive, painful transition. I mean, for a long time, Israel was not a unified nation in any modern sense of the word.
They weren't a country?
No, they were this loose, really vulnerable tribal confederation.
Just scattered tribes.
Exactly. They were highly decentralized. They lived mostly up in the Central Highlands. And this decentralization meant they were constantly getting picked off by their neighbors.
Because the neighbors were better organized.
Right. And so when a crisis arose, they'd rally around these temporary, charismatic leaders.
And the judges, right.
Yeah, the judges. But once the crisis passed, they just splintered again.
Which, I mean, that's a terrible long-term survival strategy when you are surrounded by hostile empires.
Oh, it's completely unsustainable. And that pressure eventually forced a transition. They had to centralize into a monarchy. They basically demanded a king.
But their first attempt at kingship, that was under a guy named Saul, right?
Yes, Saul. And the source material essentially uses Saul's entire reign as a cautionary tale.
Saul's story always strikes me as just incredibly tragic.
It really is.
It highlights the sheer danger of having a monarchy in the first place. Like, you get a central leader to fight your battles, sure, which is great.
Right.
But then you also put all your vulnerable people under the thumb of a deeply flawed, super insecure, and eventually completely paranoid individual.
Yeah, Saul's kingship proved that centralizing military power is, well, it's effective for short-term survival,
Hmm.
but it's disastrous if the leader lacks character and, institutional stability.
Because it all hinges on one guy.
Exactly. Saul wins battles, yeah, but his reign ultimately collapses into civil war and madness.
Wow.
But then David's reign begins roughly between 1010 and 970 BCE. And David brings something entirely unprecedented to the region:
Which is what?
genuine unity and aggressive military consolidation. I mean, he doesn't just hold the line, he pushes outward.
He goes on the offensive.
Big time. He captures the fortress city of Jebus, he renames it Jerusalem, and he makes it the political and cultic center of his new kingdom.
Okay, hold on, cultic.
Yeah.
I'll pause there. Because we aren't talking about, like, compound life and matching tracksuits, right?
No, definitely not.
I just want to make sure we define our terms for everyone listening. When the sources say cultic center, what does that actually mean?
That's a fair point.
Hmm.
In historical and archaeological terms, cultic simply refers to the system of religious worship and ritual.
Okay.
It comes from the Latin word cultus, which just means care or adoration. So by making Jerusalem the cultic center, David moved the Ark of the Covenant.
The big golden chest.
Right, this central physical artifact of the Israelite religion, he moves it right into his new political capital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he completely merged the religious heart of the people with his political headquarters. It was just a brilliant unifying move.
Okay, but he didn't secure this new headquarters by just asking nicely, right? The sources describe this era as an agrarian tribute economy.
Yes.
Wait, before we go further, what does that actually mean? An agrarian tribute economy. Are they just, like, trading wheat for protection?
Yeah.
Because it honestly sounds like mob terminology.
That is actually not a bad comparison at all.
Really?
Yeah, an agrarian tribute economy in the ancient Near East basically means that royal power is fundamentally expressed through land control, military victory, and labor extraction.
So domination.
Complete domination. In a rough neighborhood, and David was in a very rough neighborhood, you survive by dominating the agricultural output of all the people around you.
Okay, paint a picture of this neighborhood. Who is surrounding him?
Well, you have the Philistines out to the west on the coastal plain, and they possess superior iron technology.
So they have better weapons.
Way better weapons. Then you have the Ammonites over to the east, the Aramean states up north, and you've got Moab and Edom to the southeast.
Man, so it's just a constant pressure cooker. He's surrounded on all sides.
Yes, and if you look at the text of 2 Samuel chapter 8, you see David systematically neutralizing these threats.
It's picking them off.
Right. He subdues the Philistines, taking away their geographic advantage. He defeats the Moabites and literally forces them to pay tribute.
Lom tax.
Exactly. He fights the Arameans, sets up military garrisons right in their territory, and extracts their wealth. I mean, foreign kings are bringing him gold, silver, bronze.
Okay.
Conquered peoples are becoming subjects. He is centralizing all this wealth in Jerusalem through force and really aggressive diplomacy.
It really is like a chaotic startup, right? Like
Yeah.
one that finally aggressively corners the market.
That's a good way to look at it.
David is like the relentless founder who, sleeps under his desk, fights off all the hostile takeovers, absorbs all his regional competitors, and totally neutralizes the threats.
Yeah.
And once he has a total monopoly, he sets up this shiny new headquarters in Jerusalem. But let me stop you here.
Sure.
Because I have to play the skeptic on behalf of anyone listening right now. We know ancient texts absolutely love to exaggerate.
They definitely do.
Right. Kings commissioned scribes to write glowing PR pieces about how they conquered the whole world, when really they just raided like a few neighboring villages.
Yeah, royal propaganda was very much a thing.
So is there actual physical proof outside the Bible that this House of David was a real geopolitical force? Or are we just looking at a theological fairy tale written centuries later by people who were, trying to invent a glorious past?
That is one of the most vigorously debated questions in biblical archaeology. I mean, for a long time, critics argued exactly what you just said. They argued that David was a myth.
Like King Arthur.
Exactly, a King Arthur figure with zero basis in actual history. But the extra-biblical data we have today tells a very different story.
Really? Okay. Let's look impartially at the archaeology then. What do we actually have?
The single most important piece of physical evidence we have is a fragmented basalt stone. It's known as the Tel Dan stele.
The Tel Dan stele. Okay, walk me through this. Where was it found and what does it actually say?
So it was discovered in 1993 at an archaeological site called Tel Dan, which is way up in the far north of Israel.
Okay.
It dates to the 9th century BCE, so that is roughly a century after David lived.
Got it. 100 years later.
And it is a victory inscription written in Aramaic.
Okay, so not Hebrew.
Right, Aramaic.
Yeah.
And what makes it monumental is that it is an Aramean king, most likely King Hazael of Damascus, and he's boasting about his military victories over the kings of Israel.
Typical ancient king stuff.
Exactly. But in the text, he explicitly claims to have killed a king of the House of David.
Wait. You're telling me a single broken rock written by an enemy king a century later is our best proof?
It's the strongest we have, yeah.
Wouldn't skeptics, or I think they're called minimalists in the field.
Yes, minimalists.
Wouldn't minimalists argue that's incredibly flimsy? I mean, it's just one mention on a shattered piece of stone.
Well, minimalists definitely challenge the scale of David's kingdom. A minimalist, like the prominent archaeologist Israel Finkelstein, he would argue that while David might have existed, his kingdom was probably little more than a small, localized chiefdom.
Like a glorified mayor.
Right, not the grand empire the Bible describes. Maximalists, on the other hand, argue the biblical account of a vast empire is historically accurate.
Okay, so there's a spectrum of belief here.
A huge spectrum. But here is why the Tel Dan stele is so devastating to the idea that David was just a complete myth.
Okay, why?
It is written by a foreign enemy. An enemy king has zero motivation to invent a mythological dynasty for his rivals.
Oh, wow.
Right. He is carving the name of David's dynasty into stone to brag about fighting them.
That makes total sense.
That proves, basically beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a legitimate Davidic dynasty actually existed, and it was widely recognized by foreign powers as a distinct, formidable political entity.
Okay, yeah, that is fascinating. The enemy's propaganda accidentally validates the existence of the very people they're trying to erase.
Exactly.
And there's another stone too, right? The sources brought up something called the Majah Still.
Yes, the Misha stele. It's also known as the Moabite stone.
The Moabite stone.
Yeah, this was found in Dibon, which is in modern-day Jordan. This is an ancient Moabite royal inscription, also dating from the 9th century BCE.
Okay, so same time period as the other one.
Yep, and it describes King Misha's rebellion against Israelite control.
So this is another enemy's perspective on these regional conflicts.
Exactly. Now, this artifact has a wild history. When it was discovered in the 19th century, the local Bedouins realized European scholars wanted it.
Oh no, what did they do?
They heated the stone in a fire, poured cold water all over it, and literally shattered it so they could sell the pieces individually.
Oh, that is absolutely heartbreaking for historians. Just destroying priceless ancient artifacts for a quick buck.
It really is. Fortunately, though, a French archaeologist had taken a squeeze, which is a papier-mâché impression of the stone, right before it was destroyed.
Oh, brilliant. So they got the 3D impression before the disaster. Does this stone also mention David?
Well, that is where the fierce debate lies right now.
Okay.
By using advanced imaging technology on that original squeeze and really analyzing the worn carvings and how the ancient letters were formed, several prominent scholars argue that line 31 of the text translates to House of David.
But others disagree.
Right. Other scholars reject that reading as just too uncertain because of all the damage to the stone.
That makes sense. It's hard to read a broken text.
But regardless of whether line 31 explicitly names David, the Mesha stele perfectly illuminates the intense geopolitical reality of the era.
How so?
Because it shows Moab breaking free from Israelite subjugation, which aligns perfectly with the biblical description of this agrarian tribute economy that was constantly shifting in power.
It paints the picture of that rough neighborhood.
Exactly.
So we have epigraphic evidence-written stones pointing to the reality of the dynasty. But the research also dives into the physical infrastructure of David's capital.
Yes, the engineering side of things.
Talk to me about the water systems in Jerusalem. Because if you were going to establish a new headquarters in the ancient world, it needs to be impregnable, right?
Oh, absolutely. Water is life, especially when it comes to ancient siege warfare.
Right.
I mean, imagine an enemy army surrounds your city walls. They cut off your supply lines. They honestly don't even need to break down your walls. They just set up camp outside and wait for your people to die of thirst.
Just wait them out.
But Jerusalem had this massive geographic advantage. It sat on top of Gihon Spring.
But the spring was outside the original city walls, wasn't it?
In its earliest iterations, yes, which was obviously a huge vulnerability.
Yeah.
But archaeological excavations have revealed massive, complex underground water systems that were developed in the Bronze and Iron Ages. We're talking tunnels and vertical shafts cut deep through solid limestone. These structures, like the famous Warren's shaft system,
Warren shaft, okay.
yeah, they allowed the inhabitants to safely access fresh water from inside the heavily fortified walls.
So you don't even have to leave the city.
Exactly. It made Jerusalem a highly defensible, nearly impenetrable royal center. You could just outlast an enemy siege if you had internal access to water.
Let's synthesize this whole picture.
Okay.
Because David has fought tooth and nail. He has secured his borders. He's centralized his political and religious power. He has a fortified capital sitting on top of a secure subterranean water supply.
He's set.
Right. He has subdued the Philistines, neutralized the Ammonites, and extracted wealth from the Arameans. He has what the biblical text in Samuel 7 explicitly calls rest.
Yes, rest.
He has finally stopped fighting. And because he has this rest, he starts looking around his city. He's sitting in this luxurious palace made of imported, really expensive cedar wood.
Living the good life.
And then he looks out the window, so to speak, and he sees the Ark of the Covenant, this sacred golden chest representing the very presence of God, and it's just sitting in a mobile fabric tent.
Right, a tent.
So he decides it is time for a major construction project. He wants to build a permanent temple, which leads us to what is arguably the most important conversation in his life.
We find this conversation at the very beginning of So Was Samuel chapter 7. Dizid brings this grand, sweeping, temple-building proposal to his trusted prophet and advisor, Nathan.
And Nathan, who is exercising basic, sound human logic, says exactly what any of us would say to a highly successful CEO who wants to build a huge charitable foundation.
Yeah.
He says, go do all it is in your heart. He just greenlights the project on the spot.
It seems like the totally obvious answer, doesn't it?
Yeah, who would say no?
But there is a massive leadership lesson embedded in the textual narrative right here. Because Nathan's initial approval is swiftly and definitively reversed by God that very night.
Wait, so Nathan spoke out of turn?
He did.
He assumed that because the king had a good idea, it must automatically be God's idea.
Exactly. The text is issuing a really stark warning to the reader here. Do not confuse royal aspiration with divine initiative.
Oh, that's good.
In this ancient worldview, even the most noble, pious ambitions of a monarch, and even the intuitive counsel of a recognized prophet,
They still have to submit.
they must yield to direct divine revelation. God steps in and firmly rejects David's architectural plans. He tells Nathan to go back to the king and halt the construction.
Okay, I'm going to push back here.
Go for it.
Because why on earth is God saying no? If you read just a few chapters further into the history, David's son, Solomon, actually ends up building a massive, incredibly opulent temple in Jerusalem.
He does.
And the text says God seemingly loves it. The presence of God fills it in 1 Kings 8. So what is the problem with David doing it right now? Why the rejection?
To understand the why, we really have to look at the original Hebrew language, because English translations completely obscure the brilliance of what's happening here.
Okay, give me the Hebrew.
The semantic engine driving this entire chapter is a single Hebrew word. Bayit.
Baited, spelled B-A-Y-I-T. Let's unpack that.
Right. So in the cultural context of the ancient Near East, which was fundamentally a household and house culture, the word bait has a very wide semantic range.
Meaning it translates to a lot of different things.
Exactly. Depending on the context, it can mean a physical building like a literal house, a palace, or a temple.
Okay.
But it can also mean a household, like a family line or a lasting dynasty.
Oh, I see where this is going. It's a massive play on words.
The theological genius of 2 Samuel 7 relies entirely on this literary reversal.
Wow.
David tells Nathan he wants to build a bait, a physical temple building for God. But God utilizes this wordplay to completely flip the script.
What does he say?
He says to David, through Nathan, you are not going to build a bait for me. I am going to build a bait for you.
Meaning a dynasty. God is going to build David a dynastic house.
Precisely. And God precedes this reversal by reminding David of his origins. In verses 8 and 9, God says, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people, and I have been with you wherever you went.
So God is essentially saying, let's remember who is doing the heavy lifting here. You were shoveling sheep manure a few decades ago, and now you think you are my patron.
That is the exact psychological dynamic at play.
That's amazing.
In the ancient world, when a king conquered his enemies and established an empire, the very next thing he did was build a massive temple for his patron deity.
To say thank you.
Well, yes, but mostly it was a way of cementing his own divine right to rule. It communicated to the populace, the gods are with me, and look, I am the generous benefactor providing them a house.
Ah, so it's ancient PR.
It is 100% ancient PR.
It's a way for the king to co-opt the deity's authority for his own political gain.
Yes. But in the narrative world of Text Samuel, God refuses to let David become the patron.
We cuts him off.
Right. The issue isn't that physical temples are inherently bad. As you noted, Solomon will build one later.
Right.
The issue is the order of operations. God reminds David that he has never needed a permanent cedar house to be faithful to Israel. I mean, he had been moving around in a tent for centuries alongside his people.
Just camping with them?
Yeah. So God refuses to let David act as the benefactor who graciously builds God a house. Instead, God remains the sole benefactor. God says, I am the one who builds houses. I made you king, I gave you rest, and I will establish your legacy.
This shifts the entire power dynamic.
Completely.
And in verses 11 through 17, God starts laying out the core promises of this new dynastic bayit. He binds himself to David's lineage with a massive oath-bound promise.
Right.
He promises a great name, an enduring kingdom, and an eternal throne. The Hebrew word there is kiss, right?
Yes, kiss.
That says, your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. But let's pause here and look at this critically. Anyone who knows history, or honestly, anyone who just watches modern politics, knows that human lineages are notoriously corrupt and super fragile.
Oh, absolutely.
How does an eternal promise survive terrible successors? We're talking about absolute monarchs here. Kings do terrible, terrible things.
You are hitting on the central interpretive dilemma of the Davidic covenant.
Which is?
It's a question that scholars and theologians have debated for millennia. Is this covenant conditional or is it unconditional?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Think about it. If God promises an eternal forever throne, what happens when David's great-great-grandsons turn out to be disastrous, corrupt, idolatrous rulers? Does the deal just get canceled?
Well, because with the previous king, Saul, the deal absolutely got canceled.
Oh, is it?
Saul disobeyed, he messed up, and God unequivocally removed his kingship and gave it to someone else.
Right.
So what is the fine print in this contract for David?
Yeah.
If his kids start worshiping other gods or, abusing the agrarian tribute economy we talked about, does God void the warranty?
So the fine print is explicitly found in 2 Samuel 7, verse 14. God introduces a very specific disciplinary framework.
Okay, what does it say?
Speaking of David's future royal son, God says, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men.
Okay, so there will be punishment.
Yes.
There are real geopolitical consequences for bad behavior. Enemy armies will literally be used as a rod to discipline them.
Yes, but the very next verse contains the most critical distinction in the entire text.
Okay.
It says, but my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you.
Oh.
God is promising filial discipline, not annulment.
Let me try to wrap an analogy around this to see if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, this too.
It sounds almost like an unbreakable, multi-generational family trust fund.
Okay, I like that.
Imagine incredibly wealthy parents set up a trust for their lineage. The trust document explicitly states that the wealth belongs to this specific family name forever.
Right. Now, if a specific child in that lineage becomes the beneficiary and starts acting recklessly, like gambling, committing crimes, completely ruining the family name, the trustees have a mechanism to step in.
They have to.
They might cut off that specific child's allowance. They freeze the liquid assets for that generation to teach them a lesson. That's the discipline.
Yes.
But the trust itself, the core covenant, can never be legally dissolved or handed over to a completely different family.
Wow.
The dynasty is guaranteed, but the individual heirs don't just get a blank check to do whatever they want without facing the trustees.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The dynasty as an entity is unconditionally guaranteed, but the individual kings within that dynasty are held strictly and conditionally accountable to divine holiness.
So they can't just act however they want?
Right. If they rebel, they will suffer. And to fully grasp how the biblical authors understood this tension, we really need to look at two vital Hebrew concepts used in this text.
Which are?
Hesed and olam.
Okay, let's break those down. What is hesed? Hesed is notoriously difficult to translate into a single English word.
They usually are, right?
Yeah, always. It is often rendered as steadfast love, loving kindness, or loyal covenantal love. It is a profoundly deep word in biblical theology.
What does it mean in this context?
By invoking Hesed, the text frames the promise around God's own unshakable character rather than human merit.
Okay.
The promise survives not because David's descendants will be perfect, because, spoiler alert, they emphatically will not be.
Right.
But it survives because God is perfectly committed to his own oath. Hesed is the legal and emotional glue of the covenant.
It's the ironclad clause in the trust fund that says cannot be revoked under any circumstances.
Exactly.
And what about the other word, olam?
Olam translates to forever, eternity, or an enduring age.
Okay.
It sets the horizon of the covenant far, far beyond David's own lifetime. It guarantees infinite durability. And there is a deep sociological layer to this as well, rooted in ancient honor-shame dynamics.
Oh, let's dig into that. Honor and shame dictated almost everything in ancient Near Eastern politics, didn't they?
They absolutely did.
I mean, think about how desperate we are to control our personal brands on social media today. In the 10th century BCE, your brand was your dynasty.
Yes.
If your dynasty was shamed, your entire existence, your legacy, was basically erased from history.
That is exactly right. In an honor-shame culture, public reputation is literal currency. A royal promise from a deity that guarantees an eternal name and an eternal house that protects the public honor and the dynastic legitimacy of the king.
It's the ultimate endorsement.
It validates David's rule to everyone around him. If a deity abandons a king, the king is publicly shamed and delegitimized. So God is essentially saying, I will preserve your honor eternally.
Wow.
But simultaneously, that built-in discipline clause ensures that royal sin cannot just be swept under the rug. God will publicly discipline the descendants to maintain his own honor.
Ah, so it goes both ways.
Right. The covenant regulates communal life and enforces strict accountability.
So what does this all mean for the everyday people of Israel? It means they have a theological safety net.
It's a huge one.
This specific fine print, the guarantee of the trust fund, even if the current king is messing up, is exactly what allowed the Jewish people to maintain hope centuries later when the absolute worst-case scenario actually happened.
Yeah.
Because eventually, the bottom falls out of this whole operation. The monument crumbles.
It absolutely does. And to understand the devastation of that collapse, we have to step back and look at the canonical map.
The redemptive historical flow of the whole narrative.
Exactly, the flow of the entire biblical narrative leading up to this disaster.
Because this promise to David in 2 Samuel doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It is built on the foundation of much earlier promises.
Correct. The biblical story started centuries earlier with Abraham. In Genesis chapters 12 and 15, God made a covenant with Abraham.
Promising him what?
Promising him a seed, meaning offspring, a specific land, and that through his family, all the nations of the world would be blessed. Then, as the narrative progresses into Genesis 49, that promise narrows down to one of Abraham's great-grandsons, Judah. It promises that a royal ruler would come from his specific tribe.
And now, here in 2 Samuel 7, those ancient, massive, cosmic promises to Abraham are officially attached to a specific royal ruler, David.
Who is from the tribe of Judah.
Right, and his dynasty. The Davidic king is now the mediator of those Abrahamic blessings. The logic is, if the king obeys and does well, the people experience the blessing of the land and peace.
Yes, the covenant with David functions as a royal extension of the Abrahamic covenant. The land, the seed, the blessing, they are now intrinsically linked to the throne in Jerusalem.
And for a while, it actually seems to work, doesn't it?
It does.
Returning to our startup analogy, if David is the scrappy founder, Solomon is the second-generation CEO who inherits a booming company and spends all the capital on a massive, flashy corporate campus.
That's exactly what he does. Solomon builds the temple in 1 Kings 8. The Davidic Psalms celebrate this amazing golden age.
But it doesn't last.
No. The descendants who follow Solomon become increasingly corrupt. The nation literally splits in two. They completely ignore the filial discipline clause. And then comes the ultimate crisis, the Babylonian exile.
And we really need to emphasize the brutal historical reality here. We aren't just talking about a bad election cycle or a minor economic downturn.
No, this is total collapse.
The Israelite monarchy completely collapses. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar sweeps in. They lay siege to Jerusalem.
It's horrific.
They breach those fortified walls we talked about. They absolutely destroy the city. They burn the luxurious cedar palace. They take the temple Solomon built and burn it to the ground.
Everything is gone.
And the reigning Davidic king, a guy named Zedekiah, is captured. The Babylonians slaughter his sons right in front of him,
Yeah.
and then they gouge his eyes out so that the death of his heirs is the last thing he ever sees.
It's incredibly dark.
And then he is dragged off in chains to Babylon.
It is a complete systemic apocalyptic rupture. The political, geographic, and cultic center of their entire world is completely annihilated.
So if I'm an Israelite sitting in the smoldering rubble of Jerusalem, or I'm a captive weeping by the rivers of Babylon, I'm calling it a breach of contract.
Yeah, truly.
Don't you look back at that 10 Samuel 7 promise of a forever throne and Olam kingdom and think, well, that was a lie. The covenant failed. God broke the deal.
I mean, it is the most natural, logical human reaction you could possibly have. It seems like the definitive end of the story.
Right.
But what is endlessly fascinating is how the biblical writers and the faithful community process this profound trauma.
How did they?
They didn't scrap the text of 2 Samuel 7. They didn't edit the Davidic promise out of their history books as some failed experiment. Instead, they leaned into it.
Really?
Yeah, they created an entire echo chamber of literature wrestling with this exact tension
How did they do that without losing their mind?
by weaponizing their theology in the form of lament.
Weaponizing theology. I like that.
Take Psalm 89, for example. It is a profound, heartbreaking piece of literature. The first half of the psalm beautifully celebrates the oath to David.
It built it up.
It recounts the exact promises of 2 Samuel 7, the Hesed, the Olam, the eternal throne. But then, right in the middle, the tone abruptly shifts.
What happens?
The psalmist looks at the destroyed city and the exiled blinded king and literally cries out to God. The text actually says, "But now you have cast off and rejected. You are full of wrath against your anointed. You have renounced the covenant with your servant. You have defiled his crown in the dust."
Wow. That is incredibly raw.
It is.
A faithful lament. I love that concept. They're essentially holding God's feet to the fire based on his own contractual promises.
Exactly.
They aren't abandoning the faith. They are complaining within the framework of the faith. They are saying, you promised Olam, you promised forever. We are looking at the dust. Where is the promise?
It is an agonizing tension. And you see a similar canonical adaptation in 1 Chronicles chapter 17.
Okay, what's happening there?
The book of Chronicles retells the exact same covenant conversation between David and Nathan that we read in 2 Samuel. But Chronicles was written much later.
For a different audience.
Yes, for a post-exilic community people who had finally returned to Jerusalem from Babylon, but who had no king on the throne. They were just a vassal state of Persia.
Oh, wow. So why retell it?
By retelling the story of the Davidic covenant to a people without a king, the author is shifting the focus. They are taking a historical memory and turning it into an enduring future hope.
That's powerful.
They are telling the community the promise is still active, the trust fund still exists, we are just waiting for the ultimate heir to claim it.
And this brings us to the prophetic pivot. Because while the historical kings were failing spectacularly, the prophets who were operating between the 9th and 6th centuries BCE started taking this Davidic covenant and repurposing it.
Yes.
Because the human kings failed so miserably, the expectation shifted. They stopped looking for a good politician. They stopped hoping the next guy in line would just lower taxes and secure the borders.
Right, they gave up on the political fest.
Started looking for a future, perfect, eschatological king. Stop right there. Eschatological. That sounds like a word you use to win a spelling bee.
It's a big one.
What are we actually talking about when we say eschatological?
Excellent catch. Eschatology is basically the study of the end things, or the ultimate destiny of humanity.
Okay.
So when we say an eschatological king, we mean a final, ultimate ruler who doesn't just win a temporary war, but permanently fixes the broken state of the world, bringing ultimate peace and justice at the culmination of history.
So the prophets are looking forward to a cosmic fix, not a temporary patch.
Exactly. The prophets realized that the massive eternal promise of 2 Samuel 7 cannot possibly be realized by any flawed mortal descendant.
It's too big for a regular human.
Right. So Isaiah, writing in the 8th century BCE during the Assyrian crisis, he envisions a new Davidic king in chapters 9 and 11. But this ruler isn't just a political heir.
What is it?
Isaiah describes a spirit-endowed ruler who will bring endless peace and justice to the whole world. A king who will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. It links kingship to divine empowerment, not just mere biology.
And then you have Jeremiah.
Yes, in Jeremiah 23, right as the monarchy is collapsing, he promises a righteous branch that will sprout from the stump of David.
A stump?
Yeah, a stump implies a tree that has been violently chopped down, like the exiled dynasty. But a branch implies new life springing from something that looks entirely dead.
That's beautiful imagery.
And Ezekiel, writing in chapter 34, speaks of David, my servant, coming as an eschatological shepherd king to rescue the flock from corrupt leaders and reunite the people.
This sets the stage for a massive historical pressure cooker.
Hmm.
Let's fast forward to the 1st century CE.
Okay, jumping ahead.
There have been roughly 400 years of silence between the end of the Old Testament prophets and the beginning of the New Testament.
Right.
The Jewish people have suffered under the Greeks, and now they are living under the suffocating military occupation of the Roman Empire.
Very oppressive.
They have a king, Herod the Great, but he is an Idumean installed by Rome, a fake king who builds a massive fake temple to try and buy their loyalty.
It's a very tense situation.
The psychological state of the people is just desperate. The expectation had reached an absolute fever pitch.
No.
They weren't just waiting for a savvy diplomat to negotiate a better tax rate with Caesar, and they weren't just waiting for a military general to lead a violent rebellion.
No.
They were waiting for the ultimate Zerah, the ultimate seed of David, to arrive, claim the kiss, the throne, and finally make good on the 2 Samuel 7 contract.
And that desperation, that centuries-long longing, brings us directly to the claims of the New Testament.
This is where it all comes together.
This is where the redemptive historical timeline reaches its absolute climax. The writers of the New Testament explicitly, repeatedly, and unapologetically anchor the identity of Jesus of Nazareth directly to the Davidic covenant.
Now, I can hear a skeptic saying, isn't this just a bunch of 1st century writers hijacking an ancient text to fit their new religious leader?
Sure.
They need credibility, so they retroactively pasted David's resume onto Jesus. How do the sources handle that critique?
Well, the authors of the New Testament are framing this as the necessary logical culmination of the entire Jewish scripture.
Oh.
The gospel logic is very clear to them. God promised a forever kingdom to David. Israel's historical kings failed to secure it because of their sin. The prophets kept the hope alive that a perfect divine king was coming.
Right.
And now Jesus arrives as the obedient son who perfectly fulfills the conditions of the covenant. He suffers the discipline not for his own sin, but for the sins of the people, thus finally securing the eternal throne.
Let's run through the canonical map the sources provide,
Yeah.
because the New Testament writers are not subtle about this. They are incredibly direct.
Let's do it.
First, you have Luke chapter 1. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary to announce her pregnancy, and he explicitly says about Jesus, "The Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." They're directly quoting the 2 Samuel 7 promises. Throne, house, kingdom, forever.
It is a direct one-to-one correlation. And then look at Acts chapter 2.
What happens in Acts 2?
The Apostle Peter is giving the first major public sermon of the early church right after the crucifixion and resurrection. He quotes Psalm 16 and the specific oath God swore to David.
Okay.
Peter interprets that oath as being fulfilled exclusively in Christ's resurrection. The logic Peter uses is brilliant. David died, and his tomb is still here. Therefore, David couldn't be the ultimate fulfillment.
Oh, wow.
Jesus is the true king who cannot be defeated by death, thus securing the literal forever aspect of the eternal throne.
It's the ultimate legal loophole. How do you sit on a throne forever? You have to defeat death.
Exactly.
That's incredible. And it's not just the historical narratives of the Gospels or Acts. The Apostle Paul does it in Romans chapter 1.
Oh, definitely.
In his opening lines, before he even gets to his complex theology of grace and faith, he identifies Jesus as the descendant of David, according to the flesh. He links the very core of his gospel message to this ancient royal line.
And all the way at the end of the biblical canon, in Revelation chapter 5.
Right, the end of the world vision.
Yes, in this cosmic vision of the end of the world, Jesus is given the title, the Root of David. It is the culmination of all those prophetic hopes from Isaiah and Jeremiah. The stump has finally sprouted the ultimate root.
So, synthesizing all the theology here,
Mm.
the original promise of a physical temple building and the original promise of a political, geopolitical throne completely converge in the person of Jesus.
They absolutely do.
He redefines what the house actually is. He claims to be the ultimate king, the true descendant, but he also claims to be the true locus of God's presence on earth, effectively doing what a physical stone temple was supposed to do.
Yes. And this massive theological shift fundamentally changes the ecclesiology of the biblical narrative.
Again, with the theology dictionary. Ecclesiology. I'm assuming that means. What exactly?
Apologies.
It's all good. Just clarify for us.
Ecclesiology is basically the theological understanding of the church or the community of believers.
Okay.
How is the community structured? Who actually belongs to it? Under the old system, the covenant created a royal people under divine rule, localized in a specific nation-state in the ancient Near East.
Right. A specific geographic location.
But in the New Testament, this expands dramatically. The house moves from a localized kingdom to a global people, encompassing both Jew and Gentile.
Wow.
The New Testament frames this as moving from the Davidic covenant to the New Covenant, which the prophets also foresaw.
And what defines the new covenant?
This new covenant is characterized by internal spiritual renewal, the giving of the Holy Spirit, and ultimate forgiveness under the reign of the Davidic Messiah. The kingdom is no longer defined by geographic borders, but by allegiance to the ultimate king.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now?
Yeah, the practical application.
You might be heading to a staff meeting or sitting in traffic on your commute or folding a mountain of laundry, and you might be thinking, this is a fascinating, incredibly detailed history lesson about ancient Near Eastern geopolitics, agrarian economies, and biblical literary structures. But why should I care today?
The contemporary relevance is honestly profound.
Break it down for us.
First, on a societal and political level, the Davidic covenant serves as a powerful antidote to two very modern, very dangerous extremes.
Okay, what's the first extreme?
The first extreme is cynical politics.
Cynical politics.
Yes, the belief that all human power is purely corrupt, hopeless, and completely meaningless. We look at our leaders and assume it's all just a dark Machiavellian game.
Which is really easy to do these days.
It is. The second extreme is naive messianism.
Naive messianism.
That is the dangerous, almost cult-like belief that if we just elect the right human politician or pass the right policy, they can save the world and bring about a perfect utopia.
I see exactly what you mean. The Davidic covenant tells us that human governments are real and leadership absolutely matters, but they are entirely penultimate.
Penultimate.
They're second to last. They are not ultimate. Only God secures final justice. It prevents us from putting our ultimate hope in fragile, corruptible human systems. But it also prevents us from giving up on the idea of justice altogether because the ultimate king is guaranteed.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
Furthermore, for anyone in a position of leadership, whether you are leading a massive corporation, a local community group, or just trying to lead your own family, this narrative is a stark reminder.
Of what?
It teaches us that God initiates grace before human achievement. Remember, David was picked from a literal sheep pasture smelling like livestock, not from an Ivy League palace or a corporate boardroom.
Right.
His selection was based on divine promise, not an impressive curated resume.
And it shows that even the most noble initiatives, like a highly successful CEO wanting to build a massive charitable foundation, or David wanting to build a temple for God, must submit to divine reality. The best leaders, like David, when he responds to God's rejection in 2 Samuel 7:18, they operate out of profound humility and deep gratitude.
They don't operate out of toxic entitlement.
Exactly. When God said no to David's temple, David didn't throw a tantrum. He didn't execute the prophet Nathan.
No, he didn't.
He sat down and offered one of the most astonishing prayers of wonder and worship in the entire Bible. He rested on the promise given to him rather than forcing his own ambition. True authority is tied to covenant accountability, not mere power projection.
That is the ultimate practical application right there. We have to recognize that our plans, however grand, are subject to a higher architectural design.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you with today. We have spent this entire deep dive unpacking a massive stack of research about a royal bloodline.
A huge sweep of history.
We've traced the ancient geopolitics of the 10th century BCE through the devastation of the Babylonian exile, all the way to the ultimate seed of David ascending to an eternal throne, converging the temple and the kingdom into one person. But if the New Testament claims that you, the listener, are adopted into this exact same lineage.
Wow. Yeah.
That you are considered spiritual co-heirs with this ultimate king. How does that change the way you view your own everyday authority?
That changes everything.
How does it reframe your daily responsibilities and the legacy you are frantically trying to build? Are you still trying to build your own cedar palace to prove your worth to the world, or are you resting in the house that's already been built for you?